Hello, listeners, and welcome to another season of the Fantasy Animation Podcast. I'm Alex Sargent.
And I'm Chris Holliday.
Chris, we're back. We've had our summer break.
Yep.
Although, as the way we record these things, we haven't had our summer break.
No.
We are currently on our summer break, furiously cramming in podcasts. And if listeners can detect a slight huskiness in my voice, it's because I've got some sort of summer lurgy, and I'm not sure I'm going to last the episode. So there's a little bit of peril to get the new season off
on a croaky note.
On a croaky note.
Yes, and we thought, well, what episode, what topic, what case study, what animated fantasy could we return after/during our summer break? And we decided, I think
there are certain films that we always say to each other, well, we won't do that because we're going to have to do that at some point. So let's think of a reason not to do it. And it's getting to a point where it's like, we need to just crack on and do them, don't we? So it's time to tackle another Disney behemoth, which is The Lion King, the original 1994, and he says quickly looking at Wikipedia, 1994 animated musical, That Lion King. We may make reference to other Lion King remakes or sequels and things like that, but that's not what we're focusing on. We're going to do the classic in every problematic sense of the word.
Yes, other Lion Kings are available. Some are sequels, some are midquels, some are, and we will mention,
some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them.
Some are
listed a little bit of all three.
Some are Lion King 1.5, Hakuna Matata.
Sure.
No, we will also be I will hope we will talk about the musical because. As in the stage show, because of course this film is influential in lots and lots of ways beyond the cinema screen, and we may begrudgingly talk about the most recent quote unquote live action. And again, we talked on the podcast previously with Chris McKenna about live action Disney remakes and the fact that they aren't really live action, but the animators themselves, the visual effects artists, technicians who work on these films, think of them as live action. So who are we to disagree? But this is we will mention, I'm sure, that the more recent 2019 film and its more recent sequel, actually, which I haven't seen. But this is, as you say, this is one of those films of the 90s. We've done the Disney Renaissance in lots and lots of ways. We've had our foot on. This is slap bang in the. Well, I was going to say slap bang in the middle of the Disney Renaissance, but it's potentially at the end of the first half of the Disney Renaissance, because I do think the Disney Renaissance changes post Hunchback of Notre Dame, so a film we've also done. So the first sort of 5 or 6 years are the big guns, the Little Mermaid, Rescuers Down Under.
The big guns.
Well, people always forget that was actually in there, but it was in there.
Not on this podcast. We don't forget stuff like that on here.
Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, and of course the next film is Pocahontas. But I feel like after that, Disney doing different things. They're into their Hunchback, Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan. So this is very much a quintessential formulaic Disney Renaissance film.
Except it isn't, because it sort of isn't a princess narrative. It sort of isn't a fairy tale story. It sort of is at the same time. Anyone that says that The Lion King is not a fantasy story, show me another film with ghost lions in it. But it kind of is all those things. But one of the things I always bang on about this, thorny problem of the classic Disney formula, which we've come to on the podcast so many times. I don't think we necessarily.
Well, we've chatted with Ron Clements and John Musker about it, Alex.
Quite. We don't necessarily have to derail this conversation about it, but in many ways, this is quintessential Disney because if you actually look at most of Disney's releases, anthropomorphic animal stories are actually what they make. They don't make princess stories as much as they make this kind of story. So in a way, what's quintessential about it is that it isn't a typical Disney princess movie.
Yeah, or maybe it surfaces that discussion we've had about the difference between classical and typical Disney, insofar as classic Disney are the princess narratives that one would associate, but out of the 50 plus animated feet, or 60 plus now, what I thought, princess films are rare, and so stuff like Home on the Range is more typical. It's typical Disney, but it's not classic Disney.
Rescuers Down Under.
Yes.
Rescuers.
So this
Basil the Great Mouse Detective.
Yes. So The Lion King is what people would call classic Disney, but it is not classic Disney, it's typical Disney, and those things are different, because typical Disney are not the princess narratives, perhaps,
but it's also classic Disney in another way, and what people mean when they say classic Disney is that it's really, really good. Like,
they do mean
it's
that.
a good one.
It is a good one.
And the studio celebrates it as being one of the good ones, and therefore takes its place assertively in the Disney pantheon,
in the circle of life,
as a result of that. So
So actually, what we're dealing with is the film as the film, but then we're also dealing with the sort of studio rhetoric, as we always seem to be when we deal with Disney. We're dealing with industry positioning. We're dealing with the way that Disney themselves markets, celebrates this film. We know that Disney curates its own history and its own sort of it reminds us of the films that it wants us to remember, and then achieves that through merchandising and spin-offs and theme parks and all of the stuff that comes with it, and then tie-ins and the kind of multimedia franchise, let's say. And then it also reminds us, or plays with it through the idea of the vault and the things that are kept back as the classics. So this is one of those films that has a lot. It's a good one, but it has lots of possible ways in, which we'll try and unpack. But as you say, it's also, we can talk about all of that, but we can also talk about the fact the songs are terrific, the characters are terrific, the story is great, it looks wonderful. It's, as you say, it's a good one. It's classic because it's a good one. It also is in terms of aesthetics, it looks lavish and luscious. It's combining hand drawn with computer graphics, and we'll go on to talk about the wildebeest stampede. So there's lots of little bits and bobs that will make this a good one, I think, to talk about.
Well, the die is cast, the scene is set. Let's do it. It obviously starts with its famous prologue, or opening sequence, or whatever it is. And if I remember rightly from my childhood, this sequence, the Circle of Life sequence, the sequence which has the most iconic imagery from the film, I'd say, was essentially the trailer. They quite audaciously released this as the trailer of The Lion King, and that was very much like Ice Age with the scrapped nuts starter. It was basically, they showed the first 5 minutes of the movie, or the first couple of minutes of the movie, and that was it.
That's right.
It's been meticulously recreated in its live action counterpart. I mean, what is there to say about this prologue that?
Well, it's non-verbal, so it's nominally quite a simple sequence, in that the sun rises over the Pride Lands. You have all the animals that kind of gather together to celebrate essentially the birth of Simba. But all of this is done through music, so the Circle of Life number, and of course, we can talk about the Elton John and Tim Rice score, which is wonderful, which we should, and people will love. So it's essentially a gather. It's an opening that's about a celebration. Sort of these animals kind of come together. These hyper-realist anthropomorphic animals that kind of come together, that are gathered by Rafiki, who is the. Yeah. I don't want to say the head of the Pride Lands, because that's not true. But he's sort of the Jafar,
the Archbishop of Canterbury of the Pride Lands.
The
Jafar.
The good Jafar.
I don't know, yes, he's a sort of...
advisor,
religious figure, almost. Yes. Ceremonial mastermind. Shaman, soothsayer. Yes. We don't know his name, obviously, but yes, he's all wordlessly told of the coming of the arrival of Simba.
Yeah.
And all the animals gather at this Pride Rock. We don't know that, but it's the iconic rock from the poster. Yeah. And we get that moment where Simba is held aloft and all the animals cheer, and we hear the Circle of Life.
And then the title comes up. So so you're right. The introduction is interesting for two ways. One, that it was the trailer for the film, but also that opening sequence is lifted or was put into Chicken Little, when Chicken Little has this.
Another thing we do here on Fantasy Animation is that it's very important we now contextualise this against Chicken Little.
Chicken Little has come up a few times, and why not? But it's also important. When watching this film again, you sort of notice that some of the wit and the humour and the self-reflexive comedy that one would normally attribute to much later, in terms of early 2000s wacky Shrek, post Shrek. Of course, Shrek is individual, but I found a lot of in this film, and Genie as well in Aladdin. So this is also a really important film because it does some things that we would normally attribute to much later. When actually I think this is the start of that kind of reflexive.
So would you suggest that's because of the technology, or are you saying that actually maybe we're a little bit technologically essentialist in our
I think the
things like Shrek? You know?
Yeah, and I think there's certainly and this came out around the release of The Princess and the Frog, where The Princess and the Frog is a cel animated film, and that has to, or hand drawn, and that has to tell a particular kind of story. Whereas Meet the Robinsons, you couldn't do in cel animation because you don't tell those kinds of stories in cel animation. You tell Meet the Robinsons and all the hyper-ironic...
I mean, the Jetsons would quite violently disagree.
But certainly with the age of computer-animated films, there's a kind of modernity to these films in terms of the way they look that often means that their narratives are about inventors inventing things and wacky worlds of... like. There's not a nostalgia that's baked into cel animation, of course, because there can't be, but it's certainly that cel animation comes along. And of course, if they're going to make The Princess and the Frog, part of the classicism is that you can't make a Disney classic in computer animation. You have to make it in cel animation because that's what these films are like. Okay. So I feel like maybe some of the modern twists, the self-referential humor, the contemporaneous humor, as I said, the looking at the camera, and you get it a lot in Emperor's New Groove, where the guy stops the film and draws on the film cell. All of that, and even Aladdin at the very major look lifts up the film. A lot of that stuff we've sort of attributed to a post-Shrek world of irony that surrounds Hollywood animation. That Shrek was the one that really destabilized the Disney formula, whereas it seems like Disney are always doing that, or have always been, or certainly in The Lion King through Timon and Pumbaa, maybe are characters where the seeds of that kind of humour are being sown, perhaps.
Okay, that's interesting. But I guess what's interesting while we're in the prologue is that none of that is there. The prologue is an incredibly sincere,
traditional,
and actually, it's quite rich in its world building, right? You know, we talk a lot about classic Disney doing a kind of storybook open. This isn't doing that. This is very much. This is immersive.
You love a storybook,
but this is not that. It's immersive, isn't it? It's infer, it's imply, it's you learn a lot about the system of this world of the lions, the lion's place in relationship to the other animals, the importance of what Simba's birth means to this land, the sense of community. All of that is communicated. The status of Rafiki, as we've just gone on about. All of that's communicated with that single line of dialogue, or against this kind of amazing song.
Yeah, well, but also on the song, it's interesting that obviously the lyrics are not English. I'm now frantically having a little look around in terms of the opening song, sung by. The song is well known. So this is from the song is well known for its opening line, that's sung by South African composer Lebo M in Zulu. So it's a really important to start a film that gives it a sense of location and environment and space and translates as, "Here behold the living creatures of our land, O Father." So it's. And also the stage show begins exactly the same way, and all these kind of model elephants are walking through the crowd and stuff. So it's it's a bold and it's a punchy, and it's all those things. But as you say, it also anchors it in a particular part of the world that is explicitly not suburban America or Europe. This is not where Disney fairy tales normally take. This is not where Disney normally tells its stories.
Yes, and that's really interesting. And I think this is one of the themes that I've kind of teased out in my notes here that kind of struck me watching it this time, which is that actually it's only really in this opening title sequence that it does a lot of work, because it's only really in these opening titles we get this sense of what the whole kind of supposedly message of the film is, which is this idea of like balance between all the different creatures.
Yep.
But after this, it very much is lions versus hyenas with some warthogs and meerkats in. There isn't many of the various creatures and animals. I mean, set pieces aside, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these creatures, and the plot rests on these creatures, right? The creatures are there in Pride Rock as the story goes on to demonstrate that Pride Rock is suffering hardship. The creatures leave, the herds move on, and then they come back in the end in this moment of rejoice. But all of that is really the opening introduction and the closing coda.
Yep.
You know, we get the line later on about, you know, we die, our bodies become the grass, the antelope eat the grass, but we don't see a lot of that in the film, other than this really rich opening. I'm not necessarily criticizing it. I'm saying that's doing a lot of work for establishing this sense of a broader community beyond the lions, because after that it is actually quite a sparsely populated mise-en-scène, right?
Yes.
And the question of who gets agency is really interesting, because actually when it becomes less sparsely populated, it's often when these creatures, which in these opening title sequences we get point of view shots of elephants or cameras, faux cameras, kind of going over and sharing the viewpoint of birds and of pelicans and all this kind of stuff. But once that's over, when they come again, they're very much, you know, the anonymous horde in the I just can't wait to be king sequence, or the stampede. There's an interesting and live question that I'd like to explore as we go through this movie as to which animals are anthropomorphized and which animals are animals in and what that says about the film's themes or motifs or nuances.
I see. Well, I was thinking of I Just Can't Wait to Be King, because that is a sort of Busby Berkeley-esque. And I've just written a piece on Disney's use of during the Renaissance kind of visual effects, digital visual effects, in that often they're often using those technologies in action sequences, Waterbury Stampede or whatever, but actually they're often used in musical sequences as well. So Be Prepared we'll come on to, but I Just Can't Wait to Be King was the moment I was thinking, the thing about all the animals, they are used to sort of create spectacle.
Yes.
But that's again quite an early number. You're right that it's quite an individualist story within this circle of life. I'm now going to criticise it. Within this circle of life, the film's actually not that interested in the circle of life.
In fact, you've stolen my thunder, and thank you for stealing it. I think this is another Wizard of Oz film. There's the reference. I think this is another Wizard of Oz film. I think people that think this film is about the circle of life haven't watched it properly, because the entire affective register of the movie isn't interested in the idea of the circle of life.
Correct.
It has a couple of nods and gestures and things, but actually it isn't really interested in that.
It's not a big fan of hyenas. I'll tell you know.
Well, we'll come on to that and the various
racial politics.
We'll come on to that, because I think I'd like to complicate that, but I think it's an important reading we should establish.
Interesting.
But I don't think that Mufasa's message about all the animals coming together and it all being like, I don't think that actually plays out, for better or for worse, in the movie. What we get are lions who we identify with, a warthog and a meerkat, and a what's Zazu,
some sort of exotic bird.
A small menagerie of other supporting animals, and hyenas who we vilify.
So, are you saying that fluctuating register of anthropomorphism, where and you know I love anthropomorphism.
I thought you'd like this.
that fluctuating register of anthropomorphic speaking / wisecracking animals that the film allows to speak, of which there are not that many. As you say, warthog, meerkats, lion.
Lions are allowed a community, right? There's one warthog, there's one meerkat, there's one hornbill.
Yeah, and 3 hyenas.
And there's 3 hyenas. There are all the lions, almost all the lions we see speak.
So, are we saying that the film, it's not that the film has chosen not to, it's that the others are not given that kind of anthropomorphic subjectivity or agency? And so the film uses its anthropomorphic register. Of course, it has to make discriminations about character, and it's called The Lion King, for goodness sake. But it's interesting that, as you said, when you get mandrill, Rafiki is a mandrill.
Of course. How could I forget? But yes, of course.
But a lot of the quote additional voices in the film are played by Frank Welker, who very famously specialises in animal noises, and so they just get grunts. They don't get dialogue. And so that's I've not thought about that kind of fluctuating humanity that's present in the film. Sort of it's not just for narrative purposes. It's sort of quite interesting as to who gets to be part of this story and who is Which part of the circle of life gets to speak?
Yes, because actually there are some. Well, I mean, we're jumping all over the film, but that's fine.
We're still on the circle of life.
There are some very important plot points that require you to buy into that, otherwise they don't make any sense. Number one being the stampede sequence, because if those wildebeests have human-like agency, you just go, "Could you stop running, please?"
Yeah,
and they go, "Oh, sorry." And they stop running.
There's actually a small pub in this ravine that we...
and they don't behave the way they behave in
Interesting.
things. What you're watching in that sequence is humans battle with animals.
Yeah.
The humans embodying by the lions. Back to your thing, that actually it's not about lions, it's about humans, right? You know, the lions are humans. The humans are battling.
There's no real
animals.
Interrogation of that. And in fact, the way that... So that's a really interesting point. I never thought of that.
And if you don't buy into that, no matter how unconscious you are of that, that sequence doesn't make any sense.
But in fact, that's the whole point, is that, yes, you're right, that in animated films, it doesn't matter if they're lions, really. They're human. They're nominally lions, but they're basically humans. The way that... And Paul Wells talks about this in his book, The Animated Beastry, that the way that that's often articulated are through sequences in films where the animals are human. They talk in the voice of Ben Stiller or Chris, but there are moments where they have to fight their natural instincts, and it often comes with food. So you get it, I think, in the second or third Madagascar film, where Alex the lion, voiced by Ben Stiller, suddenly loses his humanity because he's been in the zoo and starts to act kind of primitive and animalistic, and the whole plot of Zootopia is animals fighting against their natural instinct. And often that's done through food and this idea of kind of primitive behavior. If you remember in this film, Simba, Timon and Pumbaa think that Simba is going to eat them because he's a lion.
Yes.
But then he doesn't. He just eats other insects that are, quote, slimy yet satisfying. And so they eat guys like us. No, they don't, because he's not really a lion. He's basically a human.
Yes. That
looks like a lion. There's no real interrogation of his lionness. When films do that, it's often through food and sort of animal instincts. But the film plays with that, and then, as you say, they're not really lions. They are humans.
I'll tell you what, when there is an engagement with that, and that's maybe a way of skipping into the continuing, is that in the sequence, so we move from this prologue to the introduction of kind of Scar and Mufasa, right? The two brothers who are going to sort of set this tale, and Simba.
Yep.
Simba's early reaction, relationship with Mufasa is interesting in that regard, because Mufasa's masculinity is defined through his lionness, would be my argument. Because when Mufasa is at his most potent, his most virile, when Simba looks up to him and fears him the most, in the way that kind of sons can often be with their fathers, it's when he's roaring. It's when he attacks the hyenas.
Yeah, and scares them off.
Scares them, and when he becomes more like a lion. So there's that whole thing about Simba not being able to growl properly. And then
he's not a real lion.
And then when he becomes the king, he lets out this lion's roar, right?
Yeah.
So there is something weird going on about masculinity being tied to animalistic nature, which I don't know what to do with other than saying.
No, but the whole... I'd never really thought about the anthropomorphic...
And we can just link that with Scar. Scar isn't very masculine because he's not very lion.
No.
He's at the shallow end of the gene pool, as he says, and therefore we can start talking about the kind of queer readings of Scar.
Which every student I've ever taught doing a project on Disney wants to talk about.
Thinks they've come up with that for the first time.
Queer villain.
Fair play, but...
Well, Ursula's queer.
Unfortunately, we've all spotted that already.
Because as with so much of Disney studies, we've watched the film.
Yeah. So there's something weird going on there about lions equal masculinity.
Well, no, but it shows me that anthropomorphism as a default register of Hollywood / Western animation more broadly is wildly inconsistent and fluctuates and is kind of uncertain and ambivalent, even with a film that is about talking animals.
Yes.
That there are really important registers of animalism in something like The Lion King that allow us to make discriminations about sexuality and masculinity, gender and performance and all that sort of stuff, tying in a little bit of voice work. But yeah, I not really thought about the sort of the lack of the mass of wildebeest that lack humanity, or and lack anthropomorphic like kind of rendition, I suppose.
So
interesting.
Yes. So is there anything you want to say about Scar? He's introduced here. We can talk about him more later.
I think he might be queer, Alex.
So Jeremy Irons, just hats off to the man. Amazing vocal performance. Villainous character design. We get the black fur. We get the green eyes. All that kind of stuff. Very much defined as a character that is manipulative, cerebral. But no match for Mufasa in a fist fight.
He's both like Iago in the Shakespearean sense, rather than Iago from Aladdin.
He's not. He is a bit wisecracking, but no.
But he's also, but also this film is also Hamlet, so it's sort of.
Yeah, it's sort of Hamlet.
It's sort of Hamlet. It's sort of what the anime film Kimber the White Lion, which in no way was that.
I don't know about that.
When it prompts that Simpsons, there's that Simpsons joke where I think Lisa is looking up. She's playing saxophone. She looks up and she sees the ghost of Bleeding Gums Murphy in the sky, made out of clouds, just as happens in this film. And then sees Mufasa, and Mufasa says something about Simba, and it's a reference to the fact that this film quite heavily lifts a Japanese, I want to say film, but maybe television show, Kimber the White Lion.
Okay, I didn't know about that.
So, but Disney historically...
I was going to say it riffs on Land Before Time.
Okay, well, let's do that instead. A film we've done as well.
Mother dies, turns into a ghost, sends the hero on his way. But I think it's riffing on lots of things would be a thing to say.
Yes, I would agree.
People who say it's basically Hamlet, I think that's not quite right, is it? Because if it's Hamlet, there's a hell of a lot of ham before we get to the lut.
Okay. Yes. So and also a bit Wizard of Oz. So yes, intro of Scar. I don't really have much to say about that, other than there is probably something interesting around character design and villainy, and the way that Disney uses character design to demarcate villainy and kind of upright. And he is designed in a slightly different way than Mufasa. They are both lions, but there are tweaks to body shape. So you could play as one should always do when doing textual analysis. You could play this film silently and work out who the villain is. But Scar. But also one of a number of films where British people play this is 2 years before Jeremy Irons would be the villain in Die Hard with a Vengeance, 1995. So
really?
This is him cutting his teeth as a villain.
Great. Okay,
in a Hollywood feature.
Fine. So I don't have a lot to say about Scar. We'll see more might come up as we go.
When would you be prepared, perhaps?
We get the introduction of Nala.
Yep.
And I just riffing on that thing about Simba mask. I think there's something very interesting about young Simba that struck me this time. About the fact that there's something about and his lion, all this stuff about his lionness, his masculinity, and it's interesting with the Nala friendship. Mm-hmm. They are designed very similarly. As young cubs.
Yes.
And they even make a thing about that, where there's lots of bits where, when they both ask their mums to go to the watering hole, they both do the big cheesy grin and look identical. They mirror each other's movements. There's a lot of these two are basically clones of each other, which is just interesting because obviously we have what's going to be a romance that very much kind of reinforces the kind of classic heterosexual couple. But at the moment, we have actually quite an androgynous Simba.
And also sibling.
Yes. He hasn't got his mate, who is a bit anxious about that. He's a bit, the reason he wants to go to the elephant graveyards is to be brave, he wants to be a lion like his father. Yeah. So there's some interesting
coming of age,
particularly when you aim this at kids. It's some sort of interesting kind of trying to appease kind of preteen. I don't know, male child. There's something interesting going on with the way Simba has space to not be a young boy in the kind of, very boring, obvious sense of the word.
So does that mean that the film is aimed at a different kind of audience? Is it trying to attract... I'm thinking of Aladdin as obviously a male hero, but Simba is much younger than Aladdin. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, is this part of...
I don't know if it's aimed at a different audience. I think there's something about the way it enacts a certain performance site for gender in these two youth characters, and the way it basically, I'm not claiming this as any kind of radical text, but it makes certain choices that it doesn't have to make that deliberately blur the lines between Nala and Simba as two young gendered lions, right? So stuff like the fact that they mirror each other's movements, stuff like the thing that Nala does to Simba that he then later recognises now is that she pins him on the ground.
Pins you again.
Yeah, like that she's better at wrestling than he is.
Yeah.
And she's better at wrestling than him when he's 10, and she's still better when he's old, and he doesn't seem particularly concerned. That's not part of his masculine angst. We obviously get the thing about, which is true in nature, I believe, which is this mention of the lionesses are actually the hunters.
Right.
You know, so in the male pride, you know, the males are not, you know, what we might think of as the masculine role, lionesses are the hunters, but we don't see them hunt, so it doesn't want to go that far. No. What we see them do is lick babies and give them baths and mother them. Yeah. You know,
the only time we see that is at the end when Pride Rock has sort of fallen away, and Nala has to tell. No, is it not? It's also Sarabi.
Sarabi. Simba's mum and Mufasa's father.
So Sarabi has to explain that there's no food for them to hunt. So there's a sort of gesture that
they are doing some hunting.
They're doing.
We don't get to see any of the hunting.
But that's also kind of only because Simba's gone. There's an assumption that it's not baked in that these would be lionesses would be hunting.
I think there's a line that Scar says. Maybe we're supposed to read it as duplicitous, but he says something like it's the lioness's job to do the hunting.
Yes. Sarabi.
You know, they are supposed to do that. They do that. I mean, that doesn't. I think I'm no biologist. I don't know a lot about this, but I believe that is true in real life. That it's the female lions that hunt. So I don't know, but there's all these slightly that's an interesting choice you've made.
Okay. So there are choices around kind of gender and performance and which again I suppose is par for the course when you are making. And this is what Paul Wells says when he talks about, you know, when you cast animals in films, you have to make these choices. You have to make horses behave like dogs, or you have to make choices that are going to allow us a way in to start thinking about race and gender and sexuality, and you have to do some of that work. You recognise that horses are noble and white, and you recognise that hyenas are disloyal or loyal, too loyal, comedic. But
I think that lends us into the next.
Yeah, I suppose whichever way you fall, whichever side of the knife edge you fall, the animators have to make some of these choices, as you say, and sometimes it's problematic when you feel like they didn't have to make these choices. But when you cast, and it doesn't have to be animals, it can be, you know, a Luxo lap. You're making decisions about character and the impression of personality onto animals. But maybe animals sharpen our awareness of these kinds of strategies because of some of the kind of connotations that are associated with particular kinds of animals as well.
Okay, so that leads us obviously onto the elephant graveyard sequence. So, plot. Scar has spoken to his young. I think they leave Simba alone with Scar far too much, just as a FYI, parenting. If you've got a slightly weird brother who clearly wants your throne, don't let him babysit quite so often.
Yeah.
But Scar has this quite manipulative relationship with Simba. Simba is kind of fond of Scar.
Yeah, that's odd.
And Scar isn't unpleasant, at least on the surface. He's not abusive or cruel. I mean, he is, but not in a way that Simba recognises. What he does is he manipulates Simba into doing things that, and he gives him this whole spiel about how if you were a brave lion, you would go to this elephant graveyard.
Yes. So that goes back to your point about humanity, in that if Simba is being told all these things by a hyena, he will have some ingrained. Well, they'll just be lying. Clearly,
yes.
He can't bring himself to recognise that a fellow lion is.
Yeah, I could do with a few more scenes of Mufasa and Scar, to be honest, because there's that one at the beginning where Mufasa kind of chastises him for missing Simba's baptism or whatever it is. And it's clear that they don't get on and that Scar is the black sheep of the family. But I'm not. There's no. I don't know. Are we supposed to see that Mufasa thinks that his brother's a black sheep, but not as bad as he actually is?
I don't know.
He's that's Scar, but not like he's actually trying to murder you and your son. Maybe keep him away a little bit, you know.
But clearly, within the world of the film, Scar's duplicity only works because
he's a lion.
Because Simba couldn't.
And Mufasa to an extent, right? Neither of them can quite
A hyena, like a shot.
Sure.
But the lion, no, it wouldn't. It wouldn't be one of us.
It wouldn't be a lion, would it?
Wouldn't be a lion. Yeah. So again, I'm really interested in this, the idea of the human and in fact, the circle of life feels less like a line rather than a connected circle. It feels like clearly they're at the bottom or a hierarchy. It's less a circle of life. And feels more like a. Yeah.
So let's get, because now, so the world is established. We have Pride Rock, the world of Pride Rock, which according to Mufasa, all works in this perfect synergy, and everyone is in harmony. We eat the grass, we eat the lion, blah, 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 circle of life, which, as we've already said, I actually don't think this film is that interested in. Yeah. But then we get the establishment of the world beyond Pride Rock. Yeah. So all of those, I'm thinking, how can we read what we're about to talk about? Well, we could talk about a country, right? Yeah. This is the nation. These are these borders. These are the citizens of the nation. If you're in this, you're entitled to all this stuff. Yeah. And then we other. So then we go to the shadowy place, which is where the hyenas live.
Yeah. The light does not touch. There's something a little bit colonial.
And then we get the introduction of these hyenas, right? So
a little bit tropes of empire here.
So here's the thing. We should present the standard reading or a very popular, very persuasive, I should say, reading of this, which is that what we have here is some very dubious.
Racialized anthropomorphism.
Whatever you want to do it, right? You could read it as a white-black segregation. You could read it as citizens versus immigrant populations. You could read it in any kind of way, but it's basically an othering narrative, isn't it? We have the citizens of Pride Rock led by the lions, who are the good guys, and we have this entire species of hyenas, of which we get represented by 3 of them, and I can't remember their names, but...
Shenzi.
Yeah, Whoopi Goldberg.
Is Shenzi. Banzai is Cheech
Marin. And Ed, who is...
Winnie the Pooh, Jim Cummings.
Okay, fine. And Ed is like this, simpleton, illiterate...
it's the Three Stooges, or it's whatever
exactly.
it is.
Yeah, he's Harpo Marx, or whoever the one is that doesn't speak.
Yeah.
People have read this as fascist. The film is essentially saying that... the circle of life means that as long as everyone's in the same place at the same time, or knows their role and knows their place in this hierarchy, everything will be fine. But the moment the hyenas want to be lions is the moment, and have their share of the food is the moment that everything goes to pot. You could read it as a white supremacist narrative, I guess. All these things. I think there's a couple of... I find the need to complicate that. And one of the reasons I need to complicate it is because I'm thinking about The Wizard of Oz, and I'm thinking, sometimes the things that the film is telling you, luckily, isn't the thing the film is actually doing, even if it means to or not. And the second is I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. One, on the racial thing, it is important to stress that Mufasa and... Sarabi and Rafiki are all African American actors.
Yes.
Whether James Earl Jones is a very interesting case study, whether they're coded as black in the same way that Whoopi Goldberg quite clearly is, and Cheech Marin obviously isn't black but Latino. Is an interesting thing, but it is worth stressing that it isn't actually a completely segregated cast.
No, and one of the Ed, as I said, voiced by Jim Cummings, who is white, and in a lot of the follow-up films, Shenzi, who's voiced by Whoopi Goldberg, is then voiced by Tress MacNeille, who was Milhouse in The Simpsons, and Rob Paulson voiced Banzai, and he's either Ren or Stimpy, I can't remember which one. So on the one hand, as writers, there's a brilliant book called Animating Difference, which I set for my students, which has a whole section on racialized anthropomorphism, which is there is no such thing as a generic human when you are making decisions, exactly the kinds of stuff when you're making decisions about casting, you must know that, like, as with caricature, you are loading some kind of expressive content into that. Whilst at the same time, we can be too quick when it comes to animated voice work because of its innate split between sound and image in the way that animated films are produced. There is perhaps an overemphasis on these kinds of racial politics when a deeper dive into some of the voice casting practices reveal things are a lot more kind of complex. And in fact, they can be made complex when we know in the history of television you have white actors voicing black performers. So it's really important to, as you say, complicate those narratives for sure.
Yeah, I also think there's back to this thing about who gets to be anthropomorphized, is that actually to say that this is a story about lions versus hyenas and that the circle of life is about the hyenas learning their place, just on a basic level, I think confuses the mythology a bit, because as I say, this is a story about what happens in Pride Rock versus what happens outside of Pride Rock. It's also a story about the way the way humans treat animals. And what I mean by that is that if lions are humans, so are hyenas. Hyenas are humans in this film. You know, we can talk about, you know, how they are humanized, but they are humans. And then there is, for want of a better expression, the natural world that is represented by all these often off-screen animals that are supposedly living in harmony. So I think it's equally viable to read this film almost as a kind of through the kind of lens of eco-criticism, in that actually what we have here isn't a white agency versus a black agency, but a consuming agency versus a sustainable agency. You have animals, you have lions representing a form of living that seems to engage with the natural world, and you have hyenas as these kind of consumers of the natural world. I'm not saying this to completely excuse the very clear reading that's out there, but I think one of the things that we always like about popular culture, and one of my catchphrases on this, is that usually when films are this popular and this kind of culturally behemothing, it's because they support multipliciple, contradictory readings. So I just feel it's important to try and tease out all of them rather than just land on
some of them.
So
does that? So yes, no, I agree. I love that idea of it's not only, but also
it's not only about
white
that.
Versus black agency, but it's about one's relationship to the natural order. And again, the film makes a very specific choice to put the hyenas in an elephant graveyard. It also, which obviously allows for expressive, creative, artistic plays with scenery and environment, but it also means that when you jump to the end of the film, when Pride Rock is now looking like an elephant graveyard, that supports your reading, I think, more, because it's about there is no food, you've sucked the land dry, so it's more eco-critical than we perhaps think, or that maybe the discussion about race maybe obfuscates that reading of eco-criticism. Actually, that's equally as valid when one thinks about the trajectory that Pride Rock goes on. And then, of course, what happens when the hyenas are defeated and it starts raining?
I guess I'm thinking, you know, what kind of critical lens do you put on to read the movie? I think if you put on the lens that says how do the humans all interact with each other, assuming all the animals represent humans, there's certain things get highlighted. But actually, if you think about, hang on, there aren't, of all the animals that are in this movie, only some of them are anthropomorphized. It becomes, I'd say, I don't know, a bit more interesting for me at least, just because I know all those other readings, to think about how humans interact with the animal world and the different ways the film stages those kinds of interactions.
It's funny because anthropomorphism is often used to talk about the human-like qualities of an animal, so that the animal is the primacy, and then it's about the human-like sort of embedded within. Whereas a lot of the writing on that I've thought about, and when it comes to anthropomorphism, is the opposite, that these are basically human characters with a bit of animal thrown in to make it like set dressing. The animalization is the set dressing. So what you're saying is that anthropomorphism can be used here to make some quite clear discriminations about, okay, well, if they're all human-like, then we need to start thinking about how the lions treat the hyenas.
Well, also, I guess, what's the political urgency? Not to get too navel-gazing here, but if we go the eco-critical value, the political urgency is not on worrying about how all these different humans interact. It's about thinking beyond the human.
Yeah.
So if you start thinking beyond the human in relationship to the Lion King, you could start. Hang on, there's a lot of this film that isn't about, you know, these animals are humans, and it's about how they relate to the stampede, the grubs under the log.
Yeah, because that can't be right.
Eating
the animals.
Yeah. Well, or is that a more sustainable way of eating all these animals? I don't know. That's what I mean. Like, it starts asking these quite interesting questions about how all these humanized animals interact with spaces that are not humanized in any way, shape or form, other than the fact that they're just drawn.
I'm now thinking about all those classical Hollywood cartoons where anthropomorphic chickens eat roast chicken.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that.
So
I don't know, some thoughts.
Yes.
I'll throw it out there. I'm sure people will not be convinced. But again, it's not about either or. It's about they're both there in a way. Yeah, all right. So, elephant graveyards.
Be prepared.
Be prepared. Right, I don't know how this is going to help my argument at all, but let's try it.
Well, I mean, a film history course that we've taught many years ago, when we're talking about crowds and the politics of a crowd and writers in the 30s and 40s, like Walter Benjamin, writing about crowds and the politics. This film has been read certainly in line with images of crowds that are evocative of fascism. So there are links that have been made between The Lion King and Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, and the way that the framing of Scar. So this is we should say that this is a sequence. It's basically Scar's musical number.
Yeah,
it's the villain song. It's the villain song, and he's essentially talking. What's the word? He is riling up the hyenas to march and essentially overthrow. This is the beginning of the overthrowing of Pride Rock. Essentially, this is where now the stuff that we thought about Scar is now being visualized. It's being visualized through kind of crowds and lines of marching, quote unquote, soldiers and spectacle, superhuman spectacle. So masses. This is a mass ornament, etc., etc. And you have Scar sort of standing in the way that Riefenstahl depicts Hitler standing, kind of commanding these crowds. So and again, you get that sort of with Darth Vader and the stormtroopers, and this is a common refrain. I know you've done some work on Lord of the Rings and orcs and crowds and all that sort of stuff. So it's not, this is cut from the kind of fascist image playbook, if such a book exists, but it's clearly intended to denote his villainy in quite specific ways, and uses digital technology to create the
But this is interesting. I'm going to keep pursuing this interpretation of mine and seeing if it's got any legs.
Just write a blog, you coward.
It is indicating his villainy.
Yes.
So I would apply the same to Lord of the Rings, in that when we get that sequence in the Two Towers where Saruman addresses the orcs, and it is indicating his villainy. It is flagging up to the audience, particularly a kind of dual register audience of adults and kids, that this guy is Scar.
He's a wrong one.
Is a fascist.
Yeah.
Scar is the populist politician riling up the crowd to do something against their better nature / counterproductive to their actual all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting because he has this, and then there's the sequence. We'll just skip over the stampede, but we can come back to it because I think it's important to talk about. Yeah. But when the stampede happens and Mufasa dies and Simba is assumed dead.
Mufasa dies? What?
Simba is assumed dead. He says, he gives this kind of politician speech, doesn't he? Scar, and he says, obviously this is a huge tragedy and it's a heavy heart that I assume the throne, but through this we will forge a new glorious world where lion and hyena come together in a glorious new, Hitler could say it, Trump could say it, insert populist.
I was just going to say insert,
but it's a populist, form of, it's a propaganda vehicle.
Yes.
And the truth is, I guess I've written down here, Scar as climate change denying populist, ?
Right, okay.
We can all have it. We can all have everything. You don't have to suffer. We don't have to suffer. We'll all have all of this earth together. We'll all consume it. No one should have to go without.
It sounds great. It sounds like the circle of life that we were promised.
Let's ignore the fact that there are finite resources. You know.
Yes. He's going for the we all need to be equal before there's an equality, which is people are. He's a great orator. Let's go with that. Mm-hmm. Scar is a great orator. I suppose is the film clever enough to? Is the film clever enough?
Well, that I'll have to leave for you and for listeners to judge. I think this film is clever enough.
Well, great.
Anyway, Stampede. Talk to me about Stampede.
No, that's that is really important. I think when we were dealing with Disney and populism and stuff like this, in no way relevant. Well,
it is relevant in terms of all this stuff about agency, animals, who's animal, who isn't.
I mean, I don't have much to add other than this is one of those sequences that has been held up within the sort of late 80s and 90s Disney animation as a sort of moment of digital technology. This sequence appears in abundance of specialist trade journals around the time, Ciné Fantastique, Cinefex, loads of animators talking about, but we've got this sequence, it's all done digitally. So this is the ballroom sequence from Beauty and the Beast, it's the magic carpet ride of Aladdin, it's the charge of the Chinese army in Mulan, it's the Hydra sequencing, it's these moments of digital intervention. So and very much adheres to a sort of spectacle, reverse shot of the person looking at the spectacle, the person looking at the spectacle, and what Michelle Pearson calls that kind of relay of looks that emphasises this kind of contemplative experience of the digital effect. We're watching the Wildebeest Stampede, but we're watching someone watch the digital effect. But obviously this is one of those key moments where like the spectacle drives the narrative. Like it's absolutely narratives, because this is the moment that Mufasa dies. But I don't have much to say other than that.
Other to say to kind of my thing would be like because they are these. Who would you like to be in this movie? Do you want to be a lion, a hyena, or a wildebeest? And there's an argument for being all three, or one of the three. But if you're a wildebeest, you're not even a person, right? This is not a critique necessarily, but you are an object of visual spectacle. You are. The fires in the Cave of Wonder. You are it makes no sense to talk about wildebeest in the same way we talk about hyenas. Because again, otherwise, why aren't we blaming the wildebeest for trampling over the two members of the royal family?
And also they're not relegated to the elephant graveyard. They're enjoying a lovely time in the middle of the pride.
And no one goes, well, obviously we now need to purge the wildebeest from this land because they've killed, they've assassinated. But none of that makes any sense.
They could be eaten by the lions and save Pride Rock. But anyway, we haven't got time.
No, quite. Well, and you can eat a wildebeest because it's not a person.
Yeah. Okay.
It'd be a bit weird if you could eat it only helps to re-establish that sense that
absolutely
that there are some humans and there are some animals in this film, and
that actually leads perfectly then into Hakuna Matata, which is more animals, more talking, more. I mean, Timon is the genie. I think we can. So these are sort of these Timon and Pumbaa are standout. Nathan Lane, Ernie Sabella, these are sort of standout characters in the film. They get their spin-off. They are centerpieces in the stage show, which opened 97, I think. I should also add, just on the notice of the stage show, that while I remember, that the 90s is the period where Disney Theatrical Productions is released, so founded in 1993, same year, or just before Lion King. This is very much coming at a time where one would imagine, and I think I've heard Susan Smith talk about this, that the way that these films use their musical numbers, they are now being written for the stage, and there are also moments where after musical numbers there are pauses where we can applaud. And then the action, so they're kind of baking in this. They're sort of priming the adaptation, as it were. So Timon and Pumbaa, I think their entrance in the stage show is exactly as it is in their film. They're being chased by something, and they are the comic relief. They get their musical numbers. They get their spin-offs. They are commentators on the action for us. I can see what's happening. So they are the sort of in the office. They're Tim. They're not David Brent. They're not. You're looking at me like you've never seen.
No, I'm listening.
They are the John Krasinski. Looking at the camera. Can you believe what's happening? So there's a sort of. They do a lot of important narrative
and
work.
It's interesting they end up with a cage with Zazu, because it's kind of the two, in a way, Zazu tags in Timon and Pumbaa, because Zazu has some of that role in with Rowan Atkinson, and the way he kind of narrates what's going on at the same time and has a kind of knowingness. Yeah, I mean, it's tonally so well judged, because you get that kind of, Simba escapes the Pride Lands.
Yeah, having thought that he's killed Mufasa.
That's really, like, still actually hits home, actually, like that, kind of the manipulation of that young boy. By this evil guy who's, like, basically, convinced him that he's at fault for his father's death. He flees the Pride Lands. He kind of falls... heat stricken, like in the middle of this desert. We get this kind of pause where, like, the film is at its lowest, and then just when you need it, you get these kind of two firecrackers, turning up, like, doing kung fu and, like, absolutely.
This is the bit in the film when my dad goes, "It's quite interesting. This is quite a good film." This is the bit that the dads like, because it's the kind of comic relief. It's the
he nearly says fart at one point, not in front of the kids, all that stuff.
Sorry, so it's that sort of stuff. I remember this vividly. I had a tape, because this is also the period of merchant-tainment. This is your sing-along books. This is I had the tape for this, and I would rewind that bit, not in front of the kids. So I remember it well. So, and it's the first. I think following up on the genie, I think this is, as you say, it's very well pitched. I think these two characters are very well pitched, and basically then just become Simba's. Essentially, see him to adulthood,
and they give him a philosophy, the Hakuna Matata, no worries. So don't worry about consequence, don't worry about history, don't worry about your kind of embedded role within structures. Like, Terrible. So we've kind of got two forms of politics, and then we've got the apolitical, represented by these two are just like, look, I wouldn't vote. Like,
It's cool to not vote.
Just worry about, like, if you've got a nice car, if you've got a nice house.
So you said, what is it, lions? You said lions, wildebeest, and hyenas.
Yes.
So you've got your three main political parties, and
basically,
then you've got
the hyena.
That as a sort of Timon and Pumbaa, which you don't vote because you can't enact any change.
But it's kind of the third quite seductive way, but ultimately they because they're lovely, we like them. They learn some sense of responsibility. But before we do that, we get that wonderful Hakuna Matata sequence,
which is him. So this is a really interesting sequence based on your anthropomorphic sort of argument within the film, which this is not teaching him. He's now in the wild.
Yes,
but this is not teaching him to be a wild lion.
No.
He's being cultured, but in a different way. So he's not. You'd have thought when he lives outside he's now got to go back to his animal instincts.
He's basically like a '60s beatnik, isn't he?
Yeah,
like
he's
gone roams from town to town.
He doesn't give in to his. As I said earlier, he's Timon and Pumbaa are very clear that he's going to eat us, but he's not been brought up like that, and so he basically goes to some sort of finishing school, learns how to eat properly, and So I never really thought about that in relation to that anthropomorphism, because that would be a sequence in another film where he goes back to basics and he's too wild, and then he comes back to Pride Rock and they're like, we don't recognise you, you're just now a wild animal. Sure. And to some extent that's true because he learns how to roar, but in the whole Hakuna Matata sequence is him kind of adjusting to the kind of counterculture of Timon and Pumbaa and eating things that animals like him aren't supposed to eat. So slugs and aphids and all that sort of stuff. Really strange.
And living this, like, whilst Pride Rock was all about like family and being in the place with everyone else, this is about roaming from where you like, not really having a sense of place, home. There's no history. There's no. It's all about day-to-day satisfaction. Yeah,
you're going to cut this out, but it reminds me of when in Friends, where Rachel has to move from Monica's to Joey's, and she drops all the spaghetti on the floor.
Right. That's exactly
you're
right.
At Joey's.
Yes, exactly right.
Leave it.
Really, you should want to live at Monica's because that's fine after for a week, but
you're at Joey's.
Yeah.
So that's how So Timon and Pumbaa, brilliant musical number.
But if we really, humanizers. They're in the 60s. They're taking drugs. They're living a hedonistic.
They sort of are, and then they look up at the stars.
Yeah, exactly.
And
they're living a hedonistic, carefree,
yeah,
no responsibility. Why get involved with the world? Well, when the world turns its back on you, you turn your back on the world. Like kind of,
But then there's that really heartbreaking sequence soon after where the Hakuna Matata tells the story of Simba's kind of enculturation into that world, but it also shows him through these sort of ellipses. He becomes Matthew Broderick. He's not Jonathan Taylor Thomas from Home Improvement anymore. He's Matthew Broderick.
Yes.
So he's now, I want to say 20s, maybe 30s. I don't know exactly how old. Although I think in the film he's probably supposed to be about 18.
Yeah, I think sort of like late adolescence is sort of how it's pitched, isn't it?
And then you have that really heartbreaking scene where they're all looking up at the stars, and Simba says, someone I used to know said that it was like the kind of essentially the spirits of all the dead, and they just sort of laugh at him, and then he starts laughing as well, and you're like, oh god.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah,
it's horrible. No, a bunch of dead guys looking down on us.
Because it's sincere and meaningful, and that's the one thing Timon and Pumbaa can't do. They're lovable characters, but they're not. Other than very small passages towards the end, they're not. They're not that empathetic.
Yeah.
And they're not good at being. They're the mate you go out for a pint with. They're not a mate you tell your problems.
Yes,
to.
They'll take you out on a night out before an exam, and you're like, I've really got to get back.
It's fine. Hakuna Matata. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You failed. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's.
But then, speaking of friends that will bring the weight of the world on you, Nala shows up. Then we have Nala. Now love interest. Can we feel the love tonight? Of course we can.
We can. Definitely not a sex scene. Definitely.
Yeah. And there's all that. There's all that internet stuff about like sexy Nala. Do you know about that? Yeah. Fun.
There's a bit where her eyes.
I have nothing to say other than that. I know.
Well, they have a sort of wrestle, and then they have another wrestle, and then there's you can Google it. There's a sort of screenshot of her doing some sort of come to bed eyes.
Yes.
So anyway, so there's all that business. But again, what's really interesting about that is that. Can You Feel the Love Tonight is the whole song is being essentially narrated, or it starts off with Timon and Pumbaa, and you get that a lot. You get that with the gargoyles in Hunchback of Notre Dame. They sort of narrate. They're us. You need someone from the outside, and they're almost commenting on the Disney formula, or the sort of I can see what's happening. This is the bit that the love song. It's a whole new world. So it's the genie commenting,
and they're kind of pop culture literate, aren't they? They know in the jungle. Lion sleeps tonight. They absolutely.
So that sequence is important, but because soon after that is he then meets Rafiki again, which is the real.
So Nala arrives, they fall in love, but the other thing is that she tells him what's happened. Pride Rock.
It's all gone wrong.
You've got to come back. It's your responsibility. He tries to explain Hakuna Matata to her. She's like, "What are you talking about, you idiot?" And then Rafiki shows up. Rafiki. So you're talking about people commenting on things.
Yeah.
One of, I thought, the richest few scenes in this movie, watching it this time for this recording, was the little moments where we go back to Rafiki. I've not seen the stage show, but I wonder if they make more of a deal out of this in the stage show. But Rafiki's almost like this kind of chorus figure.
Yeah.
Because you get him, you see him at the beginning, you don't see him again. Like, there's no scene where Mufasa goes like, "Thanks, Rafiki, off you go, old friend." Like, there's none of that. Yeah. He just disappears, and all you get are these little moments where Rafiki's in his house in this tree, and he's picking up on what's happening through various kind of shamanistic ways, isn't he? Like, he discovers. I actually can't remember how he discovers that Simba is dead.
No, so what happens is he. When Simba disappears, you do have
he's there in the crowd or something.
Yeah. So what's happened at the start of the film? He draws a young Simba on the wood. Then later on, when Simba runs away, he kind of brushes it off.
Yes.
And then at this moment in the film,
he smells.
Yeah. So after basically Simba's been told by Timon and Pumbaa that that's not his spirit in the sky. Simba runs to the edge and says, looks up to the sky and says, "You said you'd always be there for me, but you're not." And then collapses, and all of this sort of dust and sort of debris, and the words SFX.
Oh, really?
Special effects, yeah. Because people think that it says sex, but it really says SFX. and all of this stuff sort of, and then it gets caught up and he kind of smells it, and he's like, he lives, and then redraws, adds a mane.
And he adds a mane, So that bit where he draws the original cover.
He's an animator.
It's really cool. It's really cool. It's really cool. It's really textured. It's really, quiet.
That sort of 10 minutes is my favourite bit of the film. My favourite bit of the film is where he finally meets adult Simba, and they have that kind of conversation. You're Mufasa's boy. And he says... Mufasa's still alive, actually, and then he goes to look in the reflection, and he's like, no, it's not, it's me. And he's like, yes, but he lives in you. The song that's cut from the film that's in the stage show is He Lives in You, brilliant song. But then he whacks him with his stick, and he says it hurts. He says, well, the past can't hurt. And he goes to whack him again, and he ducks, and he says, no, you can learn from it. And then he steals it and runs back, and you get the dun 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 dun. That's my favourite bit of the film.
Well, I should also say, we haven't got time to really go into it, and there's not a lot to say other than the score. Of course, the songs are incredible, but I know they won. Can You Feel the Love Till I've won one of the Oscars. But the other one is the score by Hans Zimmer, and it's incredible. All these different motifs that lasted with me after watching it this time more than the songs actually. Although the incredible score, and that really helps in those sequences where we get Rafiki kind of open up his grapefruit or whatever it is and draw the Simba and then draw his mane and all that sort of stuff. I think I think those sequences with Rafiki are incredible. I think actually he reminds me of Clarence, talking of fantasy. Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life, because oddly he has the same role in that because we keep coming back to him, and because he's kind of coded this kind of he's the only character in this film that we could say has a certain magical.
He's the Magical Negro.
I wondered if we were going to go there because he also obviously is coded as African and primitively African in very clumsy kind of language, but he speaks. I found
there are bits in the film.
I actually find that more troubling than I did the hyenas this time round in terms of racial politics.
Because he's singing and Simba's like, I don't know what you're.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, you're a simpleton. Oh, no, I'm not. I have wisdom beyond that. You're right. That's exactly what it goes into. The trope of the Magical Negro. It does kind of play into that, and that's unfortunate because the character is so.
Well, Simba's very white at this point. He's Matthew Broderick. He's at his whitest.
He's
hanging around with Nathan Lane. They're having a lovely time. So I'd written Magical Negro stereotype, which I think is fair in the representation of.
I agree. I think I agree, and it's unfortunate because the character. Because they're also some of the best scenes in the film.
Rafiki is superb.
And
also in this, but interesting in the stage show, it's played by a woman. Really, and Rafiki is the one that begins the stage show. Really, kind of sings.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Okay. So they really
so it really
position
is this kind of chorus. That's what I was going to say. Is that the reason he's a bit like Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life is that it has the same structure in the way if anyone is the storyteller, it's kind of him. Like he's the one that is kind of not really part of the fiction. He's watching it. He's obviously not. He's sort of not in. Does he live in the Pride Lands?
I don't know.
Like he's sort of apart from everything, isn't he? And then he kind of arrives into this narrative.
He's Archbishop of Canterbury.
And up until that point, he's had this kind of very mystical, omnipresent, omnipotent almost quality. And then he suddenly arrives, and he's this kind of silly. Wisecracking, bumbling figure, which has a very Clarence-like quality to him. So he's like the guardian angel arriving to save.
Yes,
to save Simba.
He is
at his lowest moment.
Yeah, and so he's the person. It's not Nala, it's him. He's the person that.
That certainly convinces him.
And
then we get obviously the sequence, which we probably have to at least mention, where he says "look harder," looks into the river, and then sees his reflection. Is that liminal? Is that actually happening? Oh, it's very hesitating.
Yeah, he's given a real, subjective.
Yeah,
but
then we get the remember sequence where we get Mufasa in the sky. Hamlet's ghost, whatever, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where we get him confronting this kind of ghostly apparition of his father who tells him, come on, mate,
Sort yourself out.
Sort yourself out.
Pop back. Kind of. So, and then that's really then that kind of accounts for the last sort of 10-15 minutes of the film. So he returns back. Yeah. He has to confront Scar. The whole thing I suppose we should say is that at this point, Simba still thinks that he killed Mufasa.
Yes. So his reconciliation is oddly quite complicated. He's reconciled with the guilt he feels towards his father, and is still going to go back, and take his place.
Even though we know he's not.
Even though he thinks he's responsible for his death, he doesn't think he murdered him. He thinks that he is responsible in that way that grief can often do, but he's had an uncle traumatizing him, telling him that he is responsible.
For a while. So Scar keeps saying, tell who killed Mufasa, and then he says he did it, and
tests their loyalty for a sec, doesn't it? And then
and then. So after that,
then Scar
has to then reveal.
Unfortunately, like I'm Team Scar, but like for Scar's plan and plus plan alone, he then decides to do the James Bond gloating.
His my little secret.
And tells him, and then that's the
and then it's an odd. Then it gets quite. Then it's like Frollo's death in Hunchback of Notre Dame, where he sort of falls to his fiery death. In that Scar is then becomes food for the hyenas. They basically turn on him. But
they turn on him because he turns on them. It is revealed. They think for whatever else his Scar is wrong. He's obviously just because they know there's no food left. They understand he's not a good king. They know that Mufasa. They even mutter it under his breath in that sequence where
they're going to vote Remain. Now.
They are having Remain regrets. But the one thing they think is that at least he's like one of ours. Like he's loyal to. He's got our back.
Yeah,
and it's revealed he doesn't have their back. He just says anything that he needs to say to get
Still
out
not
of the
seeing the
situation.
circle of life so much anymore.
No, I'm seeing populism and all this kind of stuff. Absolutely, and then they turn on him because the mask falls and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and then we get this kind of weirdly kind of atmospheric, expressionistic moment where it's barren land.
That starts raining.
And there's fire, and then Simba goes up to the top of Pride Rock and does his roar.
He's most animalistic. That's the most animalistic he's been in the whole film.
Yeah. But it's also the moment that announces his return to the kingship. So there is something interesting there. He's become his father. Now we get a bit circle of lifey for the last kind of 3 minutes of the movie. Is that we get this? He has taken Mufasa's place.
And they replay essentially the opening again.
The way we know he's finally ready to be Mufasa is he's a lion. So there is something.
He is the Lion King.
He is the Lion King, indeed. So then we get this sequence where Pride lands have been completely restored, the water's back.
So there was
all the animals have come back. Everyone's happy, and they've had a kid, and off we go again.
Off we go again. Are the hyenas still?
No, there's no hyenas. They've been gone.
They could be back in the elephant graveyard. Who knows? But you always need someone to point at. You always need a villain, don't you? But the thing is that lions are allowed that sort of light and shade, as it were.
Lions are. I'm certainly very happy to go, and that's where it gets very problematic. Is that lions are lionized, for want of pun intended. They are valorized. They are. If you're a lion, you're a good egg. Other than Scar, You're good. You're a good lad.
Yeah. Well, because otherwise he can't be. That's what I mean. Otherwise, Scar can't be duplicitous. Lions have to be good for Scars to be exceptional.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah. Interesting.
So there we go. That's
the Lion King, Chris.
That's the Lion King. We won't be doing the recent version at any point.
No,
we probably will.
But my point about these readings and worrying about affect and just because a film says it's about this thing doesn't mean it's about this thing. I'm afraid to be unkind with the live action remake. Is that the live action remake is about all these same things. The circular life sequences in there. The script is pretty much identical. It's all there. The bones of it is all exactly the same, and none of it matters because it hasn't got those textural nuances. It hasn't got the wonderful little bit where this happens. It hasn't got the beautiful design of this and this and this. So it just shows you that if you distill a viewing experience down to the kind of basic plot points and bits that they repeat in the script, you really are simplifying a film's effect in every sense of the word: aesthetic, cultural, political, social. So I just think let's try not to do that. One, because some films can have really problematic effects without saying it, and the other thing can be true too. Right?
Well, let's do that in this season, this brand new season of the podcast. That's what we'll do.
Okay,
we'll keep things open.
Keep making sure that the feel of the movie is part of what we're discussing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're back. We're up and running. We've got loads of episodes in the can. We're ready to release, and we're excited to share with you a range of topics this year. We're going obscure. We're going mainstream. We're introducing you to some people that you might not know about. We've got some great stuff. I'm really looking forward to sharing it all with you. Stay with us every week. You can, of course, follow us at fantasy-animation.org, where you'll find our blog and podcast archive. The blogs will keep coming, so do check them out, see what's happening this week. You can follow us on social media at Fananim Research, FANANIM Research, and you can use that same handle, FANANIM Research at gmail.com to suggest feedback, future episodes, or future footnote episodes, which will come in between these main ones. Hey, my voice lasted till the end of the episode, Chris. And don't worry, there was absolutely no editing involved. There were no cough breaks. Everything went fine.
Yeah, and after 4 hours, let's get out of there.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.
Bye.